I says, does he have a gun? She says, yes, he has a gun. I says, okay, fine. So I had radioed at that point, more, get everybody here. And Anthony radioed back to me and said, Roy, I'm in the lobby. So, okay. And I told him where the other officer was, where we left him. And we went up, and the perpetrator turned out all the lights in the apartment. So it was completely dark. So we were looking in, and I could see that when the woman ran out, she had locked the bathroom door. And, at this point, we just yelled in, police, we know you're in there. We know you're armed. Don't do anything stupid. So we entered, and I turned the light on the bathroom. I unlocked the door, and there was another individual laying on the floor, totally taped all around. He had a beard. He had long hair, and he was tied behind his back. I was able to talk to him afterwards, and during the trial, and I just took my whole hand and I ripped it right off his face. I know I took some hair with me, and I said, "Where is the perpetrator?" And he says he went to the elevator, and he's got my gun. I said, so now he's got two guns. He goes, yeah. Okay. You know what he looks like? No, he's wearing all black. He's got a ski mask. All right, not a problem. I get to the elevator, and all I remember was I was going to open up the stairwell door, to open it up to let the officer in, and the elevator doors were starting to open, and some officers and a sergeant got off, and all of a sudden I just heard, bang, 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 bang. And I immediately opened the door, and it was like somebody just finished a cigarette. It was a heavy, heavy smell of gunpowder. Mm-hmm. So we all proceeded out into this foyer, and the officer had taken cover or whatever he did, but the alarm on the roof door was still not engaged, wasn't engaged or anything. So I had my back to all of them, and people were screaming from the street, he's on the roof, he's on the roof. So I'm sitting there and I'm arguing that no, I was right there. I go, it's got to be lower. And I went to turn to go down the stairs to go to the floor below, which would have been the ninth floor. And they said, Roy, we're all going to the roof. So we all got up to the roof. And what I had done, I had turned my radio down, because when I was entering, the apartment, you do it because you don't, it's a tactic where you don't, when you have your radio blaring. But we already yelled in, and again, this is what happens with cops, second guessing what they did. But when I turned my radio down, I found out later on that Anthony was trying to reach me, and at that point I couldn't answer him because I turned my radio down. So finally, when I turned it up and everything was going on, we had gone to the roof, and we decided to take. There was no connecting buildings, so I kept saying, the perpetrator's got to be in the building. He's got to be in the building. I know he's in the building. So we decided to take the fire escape back down to the back, yard there, and there was other cops back there. So when we went into the basement of the building, there was blood. There was a trail of blood. So I went over the radio and I said, there's blood in the basement. And the 911 operator said to me, I got a call that there's blood on the third floor. So I went, all right, and whoever I was with, because cops were everywhere at this point, we came up, went through the lobby, were able to access the stairs, and started up the stairs. And I remember police officer Dave Ned, who I'm still good friends with. He was a police officer in the 6th precinct at the time. And like I said, back in those club days, the Limelight and in the 6th, we were always, that's how we got to know each other, because you always responded across the border. And I looked up and I saw him, and I saw Vinny Fittipaldi and a couple other police officers, and they screamed at me, "Get out of the way." And I looked, and they were holding Anthony. So I looked at his face, and I said, "That's my partner." So right away I grabbed him by his head, and I was like holding him by his head, and we were holding him, and we were going down the stairs, and we were running down the stairs like from the third to the main lobby so fast we almost dropped him. And tragedy makes you a joke, because we always said, Dave says, I always remember how I said, Dave, remember we almost dropped Anthony, and the thing was, though, when we got into the lobby, it was just completely loaded with emergency service, EMS, supervisors, cops, everybody. Everybody just seemed to stop. I could say it to this day. Everybody just froze for that 1 minute. We were coming out holding him, and I'm holding his head. Dave's holding him, and we're all holding him, and we're trying to get out. And everybody what upset me more about that was I just think seeing everybody else's shock, where everybody just stood. I don't think anybody could really experience that, but I did. Just the shock of everybody just standing in place as we're coming out screaming, we got a cop shot. Now, I didn't know where he was shot. So got out into the ambulance. I had let go him for a minute. I turned to Vinny, and it's what we do. It's not Anthony, Vinny. Vinny, tell me it's not Anthony. Please tell me it's not Anthony. He was just, like the rest of us. He says, Roy, I don't know. I remember I looked at him. He goes, I don't know. So I jumped in the ambulance and got in the back with him. And I think it was 2 paramedics. And they started ripping at his uniform. So I went up to him, and I put my hands in, and I leaned down. I said, where are you shot, Anthony? And then his eyes started to go a little white. And then the paramedic basically took his fist, bang, knocked me right back and said, sit down. The best thing you could do for us now is just let us work on him. Which, to this day, I would have did the same thing. So they were going to rip his jacket apart, and he just bought the jacket. So I told him, I said, please, give me his jacket. They gave me his jacket. And ride to St. Vincent's Hospital. I got his jacket, his wallet, and his boot. So they ripped apart his uniform pants, and when I saw his underwear was stained with blood, I knew it was bad. I knew it was bad. So got to the hospital. They came rushing in, and I was with him. I wheeled him in. They were wheeling him right into surgery, and I just said, Anthony, everything's going to be all right. He says, I'll see you when you get out. So that was it. Took him away, and like I said earlier, we had a police officer, Joe Abruzzi, who me and Anthony and myself all got assigned to the 13th precinct together. 10 years later, he's the precinct delegate. And me and him and Anthony, we hung out many times, went to weddings, everything together over those 10 years. He came in and he said, he's gone. He's gone, Royce. He's gone. So I think what it was that, you talk about getting kicked in the stomach twice. I took my hands and I grabbed my hair, and I grabbed my hand. I had my blood on his hands, and I just remember not remembering much after that. But the thing was, I said, you got to get a hold of yourself, Roy. And it was just like that. It was gone. It was done.
You guys are
Done.
different. I mean that in the best of ways. And in chatting with some of my friends that specialized in that during their police careers, anywhere, doesn't matter where the beat was, New York, in your case, Tucson, it's interesting in that we look at homicides as civilians, right? We hear, oh, drug-related shooting in bad part of the city X, and it's not that we're callous. It's, listen, if it was a drug dealer, public service homicide, as they call it, whatever. Or if it's something that basically just doesn't make that much news, it's not something that as civilians is on our radar because we don't hear about it. But with homicide detectives, you guys work that all the same, because as many a homicide detective has told me, you're speaking for the victim. Whoever it was, doesn't matter if they were doing good in life or not so good. The point is they are a victim, and you guys are tasked with speaking for them. And I've always admired how, no matter the circumstances, rather if they were an upstanding citizen or a criminal, you take that responsibility very seriously.
Absolutely. I mean, we speak for the dead. That's one of the mottos through the Arizona Homicide Investigators Association, which I'm past president of now. But I mean, we go in there and you have a case, and no matter who it is, you've got to try to solve it. You've got to try to have some type of resolution for the family. I don't like the other term that they say as far as, having closure. I don't care for that term. But I know that a lot of the families and a lot of the friends of the victims that we dealt with wanted to have something. And, that's what we had to do, was work at the best of our ability. And if we couldn't close it out, we had to put it in our cold case files, which I still have a few of those over at the police department, which I'd rather not have. But I mean, it is what it is. We've had murders where we've had somebody that's found in the desert with snakeskin boots, a snakeskin belt, a snakeskin hat band. And, we know that they're not from this area, and they have a bullet in their head and they're dumped. And that's a crime scene. So those are going to be pretty darn tough to solve. And then we find out that they lost 500-pound loads in Mexico. And that's why that occurred to them. But for us, that's the whole crime scene. It's just that person. And those undoubtedly are never going to be solved. But, even with that, we still have to work that to the best of our ability.
As I ask any author, it's one thing to have these thoughts. It's one thing to jot them down, but to turn it into a book, especially as a first-time author, is not easy. But this was a passion project. So tell me about the process and getting it to that final result and the impact, and a very positive one at that, this book has had.
Yeah, so, it was not easy to get this book out there. Fortunately, I published my first book in 2019. It's Your Camino. It was a totally different genre. It's travel, adventure, spirituality, okay? So it's totally different. But I garnered several awards for that book, and that was enough to keep me going, because I'd always wanted to write a true crime memoir. So that kind of encouraged me to go forward. And so I was writing those two books at the same time. Now the problem was when I finished the manuscript, I had signed an agreement with the FBI that if I ever written anything, and this is what we all signed, that they have to look at it, and they have to, to see if we're compromising any sources and methods. So the Bureau had my manuscript for 16 months, and they were very, they were, scrutinizing everything. Let me put it that way. Now, because there were, two other agencies involved, they had to pass that off after they were finished to the other stakeholders, which was AID, which was nothing. They had no comment. They said, nothing to hide here. And DOJ, OIG, maybe a handful, 3 or 4 things, and very minor. It was really the FBI, because I'd worked in the counterterrorism intelligence thing, that was very concerned about sources and methods. So it took a long time. And then, it was interesting, Mike, because some of the things I thought would fly right through, they took issue with it. And some of the things that I said, oh man, they're never going to go for this, they let through. So it was really crazy. And, I actually had to negotiate. They had actually gone into one of the stories, and they had redacted it so much that it killed the story, but it brought me to do another story, just to make up for that story, which was Crow's Nest, with the secret, the fellow that threatened Bush. So that worked, but it was a long and tedious process, and I was always anxious about the final results. So I was very happy, and then I thought I was going to self-publish again, and another FBI agent who had his own book on Unabomber. And this is a guy you'd really want to interview.
I do.
Terry Turchi. And Terry said, "Hey, Ken, can I see your manuscript?" Absolutely. So I sent it to him, and he called back in a few days, and he said, "My God," he said, "you can write." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I've been writing since I was a kid, since I was 11. I love writing, And he said, "Can I show my publisher your manuscript?" I said, "Absolutely." So, another day or so passed, and then the publisher called me and said, "Hey, I want to sign a contract with you." And I'm like, "Oh, great, fine. I don't have to self-publish." So, I was able to get this book out, and there's just some stories in this book that you're not going to see in other books, other true crime books, simply because of the different agencies, the overseas and the domestic pieces. So, and these were stories I thought that really need to be told. What it's really like to be, hunting terrorists, or gaining success or failure. What it's like screwing up. I wanted to make sure that people knew I screwed up in this, but the honest truth. That they could take away the veil of this mysterious terrorism thing, and what is it all about? What did you do? So I'm happy to get that out and to be transparent.
So I think what's interesting about being a chief, specifically a deputy chief, as your role was, is that, as we talked about earlier, you have the personnel and also you have the personalities. Now, even though it's different from actually supervising them out in the field, as a leader, you try to play to your men and your women's strengths. You don't want to focus too much on the weaknesses. If there's things they can shore up, yeah, you help them improve, but you want to spot their talents first so that they're used to the best of their capabilities. And like we talked about quite a bit tonight, morale is maintained at a relatively high level. So for you, tell me about that, playing to the strengths of your personnel and bringing out the best in them as a chief.
Well, you can only do so much too, Mike. You're you got 100 cops, right? And you only plug people in. I thought about this a lot. I thought about this a lot after I left the job. You do your best to put the round pegs in the round holes and the square pegs in the square holes. I mean, I work with people who said, "No, you're a square peg, but I'm going to hammer you into that round hole." That doesn't work. But there's another hole that is really kind of unique, and that's that star-shaped hole. You only get one or two of those guys on the job, and sometimes you burn them out because like a place like Paramus, you've got a couple of really talented people, and you try to give them all the jobs because they do it, and you can really burn them out. That was tough, and when Rick was chief and I was deputy chief, I mean, we pondered this quite a bit, and even in those assignments, because, sometimes the greatest cop does not make a great boss. You know what I mean? Sometimes a good sergeant does not make a good lieutenant, or you move them into a position that they just don't have the aptitude for. And that's not as much on them as it is on you. But how do you know sometimes? I oftentimes looked at the people that I put in some positions that turned out to be, a little bit of a monster for me. And I'd look in the mirror and say, "Dr. Frankenstein, what the hell did you do?" But you don't see it coming. And then I've seen other people that just, blossomed. Give them an opportunity, they just blossomed. So, but you only have. I mean, I think really, my view of police work, and even in Maine and in Paramus, and then I work with a lot of agencies right now in the position I'm in. You got I think in most organizations, you got 10% of that organization that are the greatest human beings that you ever met. And you have 10% of that organization are maybe the worst human beings you ever met. And the 80% make or break that department, which way they're influenced, which way they're flowing. And, that 10% that are the greatest human beings may not be in leadership, so it's sometimes it's the luck of the draw. You could see places come together, I'll tell you a guy you got to have on it. Jimmy Sacco, who's the chief of Elizabeth. I mean, he's turned that department around. Like, and and I talk to those guys, and they are so thrilled that he made chief. Which is makes me feel good. He's a real sharp guy. But it's a lot of its personalities. A lot of everything that we do in policing. Collaboration. I mean, Bratton's thing, collaborate or die. I mean, that was my strength. I really don't understand why you wouldn't collaborate, but I have met many people that don't want to. But collaboration is like a key. It really is. And I mean, even like we always joke about New York City. I mean, New York NYPD as an organization, really tough to break. NYPD cops to deal with are like unbelievably great to deal with. And I dealt with numerous. I mean, but the organization itself is like the 500-pound gorilla. You can't break it.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting when you get cops or cops. And somebody out of we have a bunch of SF guys, Delta guys and Navy SEALs that do some of our tactical training for us, and they've been doing it for a while. You get to know them pretty good. And the funny thing is they love cop stories. They when you go out, I'm like, hey, tell me about the Bin Laden raid. No, tell us a cop story first. They really like cop stories. But one of the things that one of them said to me is, hey, you know what it is, Jim? Real knows real. And that's that is important. And I think real cops know real cops, and they don't have to be wearing a blue uniform. They could have a brown uniform on. They could be working in a one-man shop or whatever, but they really do the job and they're real. I think there's a certain core that runs through real cops, and not everybody gets hired as a real cop.
Worked on a case. So you got a Chinese guy from he's a Chinese military intelligence officer, supposedly retired. I'm not buying it. He settles in Brooklyn. He meets up with a Jamaican middleman in the Bronx. The Jamaican guy knows all these car thieves. And the Chinese guy puts in an order for A6s. He needs A6s, silver and black. And he pays the Jamaican middleman $5,000 a car. The Jamaican middleman farms out steel teams, and he's paying each car thief between $500 and $1,000 a car. So these guys in the Bronx are running around the 5 boroughs. Then it got so big they were hitting car dealerships in Westchester County, Long Island, Connecticut, New Jersey. They're stealing Audis at a record rate, right? Well, we don't know about this, but what we're noticing is everybody's talking. Our police department, different agencies, where are these Audis going? Because usually when you got a pattern of stolen vehicles, they're turning up somewhere. The bones, as we call it, are chopped up. You're finding them on the side of the road, parked in the street. You lock up a guy driving a stolen Audi. Like, these cars were basically the Bermuda Triangle. We're losing hundreds of Audis over the months, and they're not turning up anywhere. So what these guys are doing is, after they're stealing the Audis, they park them on the street for a day or two to make sure they don't have GPS or LoJack. When they're confident, they drive them out to Brooklyn. The Chinese guys rented this warehouse in an industrial area on Metropolitan Avenue, I think it was, and they've got Chinese workers in there. So they bring the cars in 2-3 at a time. The gate goes down, and inside you got shipping containers. And what the Chinese guys would do is they would drive the Audis into these shipping containers, let the air out of the tires so the vehicles would sit low. Then they would build a wooden frame above the stolen car and put another 1 or 2 in there. So each shipping container contains several stolen Audis. From there, they would call a trucking company. Trucking company comes, takes the container, brings it out to Newark, New Jersey, where it gets put on a train, and these vehicles are railed across the United States. They go to Long Beach, California. They're put on cargo ships, and they're sent to Shanghai. And I mean, this was going on forever until we caught on to it. So we go up on wiretaps, and what we realize is, well, the NYPD is so big and diverse. We had Chinese cops that we brought in from different precincts that spoke Mandarin and Cantonese to monitor the Asian wiretaps. We had Spanish detectives monitoring the car thieves because a lot of times they spoke Spanish. And what we quickly realized is our thieves, as busy as they were stealing all these cars, are in the murder for hire business. And they're talking about whacking this guy and killing that guy. So when we finally took that case down, we probably closed or cleared about 15 homicides. And it was a couple of the guys in the crew. One guy was the worst. This guy, Fausto Gonzalez. He actually did a homicide in Hartford, Connecticut, if you want me to talk about that. But there was several guys in that group that had multiple bodies on them. So when we took down this international shipping case, we solved a bunch of homicides.
Or actually, I don't know if it was called. How did the opportunity to join WNBC come about?
Great question. I was at school in Mississippi. And again, at the time I was doing weekend weather in Greenville, Mississippi. And actually at this time I was doing it in Jackson, Mississippi. And I had attended conferences throughout my time, even post Syracuse, basically. I was always going to weather conferences and networking, which I always tell my interns that is the key to growing in the career that you want, is to network and meet people. And so I had been at a conference whereby I walked the floor, met a couple of news directors, and was offered an interview for a job in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm sorry, New Haven, Connecticut.
Hey.
Is that where you're from?
Yep.
Beautiful. So it was New Haven, Connecticut. Oh, so then is it Dr. Mel?
Yeah, he passed away a few years ago. Yeah.
Yes, he did. He was. I was lucky enough to meet him before that. He had just written the book Weather for Dummies at the time. So anyway, I remember coming home to Mississippi, and there was a message on my answering machine. That's how old this was. This is the answering machine from a news director in Miami, Florida, who had gotten my tape somehow and was interested in talking to me for a position. And I thought, well, I never sent my tape to Miami. How did he find out about me? It turns out my former news director at NBC, because I was a trainee there first, that post-college, she forwarded my tape to the news director in Miami, because I kept going. When I went home to New York, I would go visit NBC, visit Al, and visit Paula Madison. She was the news director at the time, and have them evaluate my tapes to get critiques and, hone my craft. So she passed me on to Miami, which I was thrilled, because I had a brother who lived in Miami and I loved Miami. So I thought, oh my gosh, I definitely would love to go to Miami. So I flew to Miami and went for the interview. And while I was in Miami, I got a call from a news director in New York City to come to New York. And I thought, oh my gosh, wait a minute, I'm New Haven, Miami, New York, what do I do? And I hopped on a train from New Haven, because actually I went from Miami to New Haven to do that interview, hopped on the train from New Haven to New York, went to meet the GM at the time, Dennis Swanson, God bless him. And he gave me a shot. He offered me a position. And the rest is history.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about, because this hits close to home for me as well, as I mentioned off the air, my mother's a cancer survivor, as are you. So having this diagnosis and also being in the public eye and finally beating it, tell me about juggling those two things and then learning, hey, I'm cancer free. And congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah. You know what? I have to say it was pretty scary, because it was my nose. And obviously I'm on TV. And so, I'm sure anybody, if they say they're going to, take off your tip of your nose, you would normally have some feelings. But I was like, wait, this is my career. This is my livelihood. Does this mean it's over? It was a lot emotionally, mentally to kind of figure out. And then going to, meet with plastic surgeons, and what is that going to look like, and how's it going to go? And one of the great things is that my co-anchor, Carol, had recently battled stage 4 lung and brain cancer. And so I had, gone to the hospital and seen her there. And she is, I'm not great with doctors. I don't know how to say, but I'm kind of phobic of that thing. I don't really do well with them. And she's the opposite. She can handle that. So she came to every appointment with me. She was my healthcare advocate. She sat with me during my surgery while they did everything. She held my hand the whole time. She went with me through the plastic surgery. She actually had to hold some of the stuff while they had to take my cheek and stretch it over my face to rebuild my nose. And all of it, my follow-ups, my everything. And I just have even my workout girls, they brought over food for my family, and just the community, the outpouring of people just sending you love, and my old sorority sister sending me big beach hats, and just lovely things. So it was, it was painful and scary. And then when you come out on the other side of awful and you realize okay, do I have the same nose? I don't. But does anybody care but me? I don't think so. You think it's so terrible, and like I wouldn't recommend it. 0 stars, like don't do it. But I think now being on the other side of it and having felt that love and of my kids, of my family, of my friends, and getting through it. Yeah, I mean, cancer, I don't want to say a bad word, but you know what it is.
Yeah. It is. It is. I'm with you. And listen, Elizabeth 1, cancer 0. So
That's right.
there you go. And I tell you, nobody cares about the nose. We're just glad that you're healthy and that you're doing well. That doesn't matter. The nose is secondary, and your nose looks great.
Thank you. Now everybody's like trying to see.
But you know what? I admire that about you, because listen, back then it wasn't easy, but especially for women, for women on the job, it wasn't easy because there was that disrespect. Attitudes have changed. Was everybody that way? Of course not. But you had some guys like that thought she should be in the kitchen, and it's an unfortunate mentality, but some at it. So you were tough, girl, and you needed to be.
I hate to tell you this. I was in 10 truck. I was in now 10 truck relates to 2000, 1999, 2000.
Around there, yeah.
We get a call on the midnight. I'm working with Kenny Schnetzler. We get a call from organized crime in Flushing, after hours gambling joint. I was operating the vehicle, so I'm operating the tools. I step out of the truck. The lieutenant does this. When he looks at me, and I go, okay. What do you need, Lou? He goes, we need the locks cut. Okay. Go to the back of the truck, take out the K12 saw, 3 pulls, start it up, buzz his locks off. There's no conversation. And they're just looking at him. I go, what else do you need? He goes, can you stay till we figure out what we got inside to see if there's anything else we have to get into? I'm on the clock until 8:05 unless a cop is shot, boss. And that was my answer. And I just stood there. So he comes out. He goes, everything seems to be pretty good inside. I said, okay. I take his name. He goes, I think I got to apologize. I said, apologize for what? He goes, I think I gave you a look when you pulled up and got out of the truck. I said, you think? He goes, no, I did. I said, yeah. He goes, but that didn't stop you. He goes, you went to the back of the truck and got your, the tool out and you did what I asked. I said, why is it so hard for you to imagine that I could do that? Now, on the flip side, there are women who get into a unit that don't belong there, or get into a place that they don't belong. They think it's cool. And the difference is, if one woman can't, then none of us can. We're not judged on an individual basis. So sometimes, if you're in a place that requires a certain amount of physical strength, that tool is not going to get lighter. You need to build your body strength up to pick the tool up. And I think that's what guys respected about me, was that I worked on, if I was coming up short, I would work on something. I would build my body up to that. And that's just the way I was. That's just me. I can't say that about everybody, but people need to judge women on an individual basis and not lump us all into, oh, women don't belong in this unit. And I mean, I've gotten stories back from guys that I know who said, okay, not all women do, but I'll call up Anita, and not only will she kick you behind, but she'll make you a nice cup of coffee afterwards.
The captain of the house actually was on medical leave at the time when I first got there, and his name is, I should say, not was, he's still alive, Joe Rabando. And Joe Rabando, I like to think that I if I could have took a lot of things away from and learned, I learned a lot from Joe. He was he always taught me that this is a professional job. And if you want to be treated like professional, you have to act like a professional. So everything with Joe was professional. You didn't do unnecessary property damage. You didn't force doors if you could go through the lock. He was on the side. He was a locksmith. So, like I say, if the assignment called for it, if you had fire blowing out the windows, we forced the door. But if you had like food on the stove or if you had an oil burner, or if you had minor things like that, you went through the lock and you did as little damage as possible. That was his, that was the way he was. And the other thing with him was that he always looked professional. He didn't want you on the rig looking like, like somebody had to ask what you do for a living. He wanted you to look like you're a member of the New York City Fire Department. And that's, like I say, that I took that with me through my whole career, because if you want to be, like I say, and, treated like a professional, and it's a profession, it's, then you have to act the part of a professional. Mm-hmm. So, like I say, I always like to credit Joe with that, because he definitely ingrained that into all of us at the, matter of fact, I remember when we were in a basement one day, and we were pulling ceilings, and we had a really big guy. He was like 6'6", and it was a ceiling, small. He just put his arm up and he started grabbing it, and Joe said, no, that's not how we do things. He says, you use the tool, you do it the way, the professional way of doing things. And that, that's the way he was. You do it professionally, you do it right. And, like I say, I always took that. And in your demeanor, when you interface with the public, right? That's another thing that remember that we are public servants. That doesn't mean that people trample all over you. If people are not acting accordingly, you can't. But you go back in a civil way. And again, remember that regardless, even if they're totally wrong, there's ways of talking to them that does. You don't have to right away go into the gutter, and even if they are, so. Those are the things. Those are the lessons that I definitely learned from him.
Thereafter, we get a call from FEMA, and I said, "Hey, we want to know how you did that. How did you guys deploy? How did you build a team?" And so we explained it all to me. So we'd like you to be part of the National Urban Search and Rescue Development Team. And so, okay, our first meeting was in Seattle in 1990, and to my surprise, Captain Downey at the time was the captain, and who had gone down to Puerto Rico, wanted to be very much involved, but he was out. The chiefs above him really weren't interested in the program, so they didn't send him to Seattle, which was shocking to me. And so when they put the committees together, they reserved a seat on the rescue committee for an FDNY guy, but he was not committing to Downey. I said he'd be the best guy for it. So in April and May of we had our very first meeting, and I think I sent you a picture of the team that was there. We were down at the EMI. Yeah, that's it. So Chief Downey was in the middle. I'm the guy in the black shirt. On a light blue shirt was a guy by the name of Samuelson. He was Long Beach Fire. Brilliant guy. Guy behind him was Billy Gustin, Miami-Dade Fire. I think you might have another picture of him. I ran into him 32 years later, just this last March at the Fire Academy down in Miami. We were doing a class, and I couldn't believe it. We ran into him down there. Yeah, that's him in the middle, and with the glasses, and that's Billy Gustin from Miami-Dade. And so it certainly was a surprise to see him again. But basically, we spent 2 years back and forth every so many months developing the equipment list, these training standards, everything that you would need to be on the team. It was going to be a 56-man team. You're going to have a technical component. You were going to have a hazmat component. We had a rescue component. You had a medical component. So when you put all these together, the technical team included communications, search team aspect with search dogs, technical search. So it was each position was well defined. And so when we came back, grant money, then even though we were on the committee, we still had to apply as a New York City team. And so when we did that, at $220,000 from the federal government to become one of the USAR teams. Well, that money had to go through New York State Emergency Management back to New York City. And New York City said, it was matching funds. When are I going to fund it? What do you mean you're not going to fund it? Well, so it was like all this work and time and effort, and the city says, when are I going to fund it? They want to give, they got to pay the whole kit caboodle. So talked to Downey, and I talked to a guy named Maniscalco over in EMS, and we said, here's what we'll do. We each got purchase orders of stuff we purchased through issue, through the fire department, through EMS, which was an independent agency at the time. We met in Ray Downey's living room out in Deer Park, and we sat down and we went through the checklist. We were required to have a Hearst tool. Boom, give me the purchase order. Purchase order for a Hearst tool. Airbags, jacking bags, Paratech. Everything that we had purchased, we showed a dollar for dollar match. Went back to the state and said, here's our dollar for dollar match. We did it. We got the grant, $220,000. That was the initial thing. So that was about 93. And by April of 1995, we were one of the 11 teams at the time that were up and running. And we got deployed to Oklahoma City on April 19th, 1995. So that was our first major deployment.
I'll give you a nice little story. I was sitting talking to a consultant several years back, and he was saying to me, you know, Ernie, what you do can become by the numbers. You know, you end up reporting stories on the air, you read stories, you introduce a reporter, you introduce the weather person, you do all of that, and you can become unconscious competent. You do it without having a problem. It's like driving a car. There are people who can drive a car for years and never have an accident, never have a problem. Thank goodness. You are unconscious competent. Now, he said to me, here's the secret to what you do. I've seen it, he said, but I want you to encourage it even more. I said, what is that? You have to be conscious competent. You see the difference? When you're unconscious competent, you're just doing it. But when you're conscious competent, you're thinking about it. So when you're tossing to a reporter, you don't just say, John Powers is on the scene right now with more on that fire. No, you find out more about the fire. And you turn around to that reporter and you say, John, you've been covering that story. I just heard that this particular situation just took place. Can you fill us in more with the detail of what exactly happened? You find ways to make your job more interesting. And when you make it more interesting for yourself, you're making it more interesting, obviously, for the viewer. So conscious competent, being aware of what you're doing and finding new ways to do it. Don't keep saying it the same way. Don't keep doing it the same way. Another thing that I followed in my career that's helped me a lot, I want to be consistent. People have to know that when they're going to watch me, when they're going to listen to me, there's a consistency to who I am. But there's always an element of surprise. Be a little different. Don't do it the same way. Unconscious competent, right? Conscious competent. Think about something that you can add that makes it a little different. A comment that you might make, a response that you may have to something. And that's what keeps you current, keeps you in the present. And I think that you have to embrace what's going on. There's nothing wrong with being critical about something and trying to improve it. But I think you also have to be in the game. I mean, if social media if there's some technology out there, there's a big thing now about artificial intelligence. AI is huge. What are we supposed to do? Sit back and say, not for me. I'm not going to do that. You got to take a look at it. There's a billboard when I'm driving into New York City and it says, AI took my job. And below it, it says, to the next level. So I look at that billboard when I'm driving in and I'm saying, okay, that's the attitude to have. It's here. It's here. Look at it. Find out what it is. How can it apply to your life? How can it apply to society? Where is it going to go? How is it developing? How can it be used? And how can we also try to make it better? How can we improve it? There'll always be a human element. They just had that huge strikeout in California. But, the important thing is that if we have to deal with AI or any other form of new technology, the human element will always be there, always. And I believe in that. So we just have to find new ways of doing things. Don't sit back and say, I quit. I don't want to be part of this. No. How can I be part of this? How can I be involved in this? How can I make it better? How can I utilize it in a positive way? I always go back to that word positive because it's a big part of my mind.
I mean, you're only as good as your next fire. And, you talk about guys that are experienced. And I always say, listen, I know lots of guys that have been to lots of fires. and they're not that great. You know, experience, and it's just what you're saying is experience is only as good as how you apply it to the next fire. If you're not learning anything from the fires that you've been to, then you're, you know, whether you go to fires or not, it's worthless. You know, you gotta take something, and like any class that I do, I say, listen, if you leave here one thing better, just one thing better than when you entered that door, it's a win for me, and it's definitely a win for you. Because if you look at it over time, you know, if you're looking to be one thing better every day, by the end of the week, you're 7 things better. By the end of the month, you're 30 things better. And by the end of the year, 365 things better. And if in the fire service, I don't think we can settle. I don't think we should settle. I don't think we should say, okay, I'm there. I've reached that level. You know, I dedicated myself to engine work, you know, and I made it my point to learn as much as I could about it. So, you know, one, if I'm teaching, I have that answer. And well, one, if I'm on the fire ground and something goes wrong, I can solve that water issue, or I know how to fix it. And then the second, on the, you know, if I'm teaching and someone asks me a question about it, I'll have that answer for them. You know, and I'm still learning. I still take classes, and I'm retired, and I still go to class.
Now comes the rebuilding portion, not just for the command staff, but for the department as a whole. You can't replace any of these members, but you have to try to push forward with new tactics, and you try to fill the ranks to the best of your capabilities with the right people in mind. So that portion for you, it's not going to take a year. It's going to take at least 2 or 3 to put things back together to the best of your capabilities. But you were up to the task. So from that day forward, tell me about the process to getting the FDNY as close to the level as it was before 9/11.
Well, I was down. I was assigned from day one to 9/11. I worked down there, and I was put in charge of the rescue recovery operations and the World Trade Center task force. And in March, I got pulled off the site after about 6 months there, and it was pretty much winding down, and we weren't really finding too much anymore. And I was called into Commissioner Scapetta's office, and I thought it was just a meet and greet. You know, Chief Casano called me up. He says, "Petey, come on over to headquarters. The commissioner wants to meet with you." Oh, okay, that's what I thought it was, a meet and greet. You know, he wants to meet all his new staff officers, because in November, I was promoted. I was a deputy up until November. In November of that year, I got promoted to Assistant Chief of Operations, but I never left. That was my assignment down. You know, they gave me the 3 stars and whatever. But so anyway, I go down there, and the commissioner tells me about this McKinsey consulting group. They were going to offering their services, a worldwide consulting group, and they wanted to do a report and preparing the fire department, basically rebuilding it and preparing it for future terrorism events. You know, so would I work with the McKinsey group? Because I was down there that day, and I went like that. And I said, yeah, okay. But I want Joe Pfeiffer along with me, because he was with me throughout that day and for many of the months afterwards. So Joe and I wind up working with this consulting group. And we wrote for about 4 months, a lot of hours we put in like that. Joe and I knew what needed to be done. One thing I learned about consultants, they just write down what you tell them. You know, they knew nothing about the fire department. They knew private industry, but they didn't know anything about the fire department.
Yeah, of course.
But anyway, they didn't know an engine from a truck. You know, anyway, we put the report out, and most of it was a recognition of what went wrong that day and how we were going to improve. And during that period of time, we really had lost so many leadership positions throughout the department, especially in our special ops and all the rescue guys that got killed and everything like that. And we needed to look at the training, because we were hiring guys, you know. But the training was a challenge for us at this point in time, because I said to them, I said, look, you know, the firefighters wanted to know, what are you doing for them? The company and chief officers wanted to know, what are you going to do for them? But they weren't looking at it like in just an additional training. The firefighters wanted to know, what kind of equipment are you giving me? You know, what kind of masks, what kind of chemical equipment, what kind of dosimeters, or what kind of meters are you going to give us to help us fight this new world we're in? And the officers wanted to know, how are you going to help me manage one of these large-scale terrorist incidents? So the challenge was to continue training the firefighters in the offices on our bread and butter, the things that we do on a daily basis, and at the same time, train them and focus them on terrorism and counterterrorism, terrorism preparedness. And out of that came the counterterrorism leadership course. Out of that came the Fire Officers Management Institute with Columbia. We got that started, the counterterrorism like that. We started sending chief officers, company officers to the Naval War College, the Army War College. So we increased our level of professionalism, particularly with the training, particularly with the counterterrorism preparedness there. You know, we were teaching a different type of training we were given to the officers, you know, so that was important, the training part. But there was also a recognition there that, and I had mentioned it and alluded to it, was the having an up-to-date fire department operations center, which we didn't have at the time. We really had nothing more than a notification desk where the chief of department and chief of operations could still run the city. You had to remember that we had this one event down in Lower Manhattan, but we still had all these other boroughs going on. And all the experts were telling us from the Joint Terrorist Task Force that we were going to get hit again. And that's the framework we were operating in, that we were going to get hit again. And they said it would not be most likely would not be a large scale event like 9/11, but a series of smaller multiple attacks throughout the city. So the previous administration had done away with borough commands. They had reduced the number of staff chiefs from, I think, 22 or 24 down to about 12. And in my discussion with Commissioner Scapetta, he said, "What do you think needs to be done?" I said, "We need to go back to a borough command structure." And I said, "It might not be the most effective, but I said we need upper level chief officers on duty." And I said, we also need to structure and diversify the department. So the way we structure the department moving forward overall was we would go back to 5 borough commands, and each borough would be structured so that they can operate as a mini fire department. So when we increased our hazmat capabilities, we needed to increase. We knew that. Our special operations capability, our rescue operations, all that. We increased the number of reserve apparatus we had, our ambulances, techs there, the reserve apparatus, I think I mentioned that, the recall procedures for having guys come in and everything. All of this was centered around the being prepared for a possible terrorist attack moving forward, or even just a large-scale incident. Everything was chaotic on 9/11 for the many weeks afterwards. You know, so if the chief of operations or the chief of department was faced with the terrorist attack out at Kennedy Airport, and we had another event going on at Grand Central Station, the chief of operations or the chief of department can say to the borough commander out there, "You're not getting any more help. You know, we have another event going on over here. And you're going to get 2 rescues, and that's all you're getting, and you're going to have to handle it with what you have, with the resources that you have." The reserve apparatus, I think at the time, we put in 22 engines, 11 trucks, additional squad and everything. We strategically located them all around the area with cache of supplies. And all we needed was to staff those rigs. They were fully equipped. Bring guys in on recall or overtime, bring them in, give them radios, and give them assignments so we'd have personnel. So that's the framework in which we were operating moving forward, that we were going to get hit again. Fortunately, we didn't have any large-scale things, but you never know what's with the world going on, what's going on today across the world. You never know.
Ask you about getting into the counter sniper portion of ESU. It's an interesting place to be. Not many guys or gals can go there for that matter. Tell me about the opportunity and why you wanted that, if you wanted that.
You know, as a kid, you know, I wasn't sure in the beginning if I really wanted it. There were other young ladies that were in the unit before me, Maddie Lawrence being one of them. And, you know, you don't want to step on anybody's toes. You know, I didn't volunteer to, you know, anything. Usually would go, you know, they would give the rifles to the senior people as others moved on or retired and had a rifle, and they would pass that rifle down to the next senior person if they were interested. At the time, Maddie had turned it down. She didn't have an interest in it at the time. and they decided that they were going to do a shoot off up at Rodman's Neck, and if you were interested in getting on the team, you could try out. So I remember as a kid, you know, having an uncle that was very big into hunting, and you know, so I had thought about, you know, I said, wow, that would be fun to go out there. You know, that's interesting, and I also found that it's to be a challenge. But you know, always big into camping and being out there with the little pellet guns and stuff like that as a kid. So I said, you know what, I'll try out with you know, with the respect, you know, of Maddie, and I figured, I said, okay, I try out, and I went up there with the rest of the guys. And prior to me actually going up there, about a few days before, knowing that it was coming up, I went up to the range and I spoke to one of the range instructors, and I talked to him about, you know, the rifle, and I said, you think I could, you know, practice a little bit before I try out? And he was more than happy, and I thank him to this day. He took me out there and practiced with me, let me get comfortable with the rifle, and gave me some you know, techniques and what to do, and you know, breathing being one of the big things. And then the day came up where we tried out, and I have to say I was a little nervous. You know, I was the only female trying out with all the rest of these guys, some that were in the military, some that I'm sure that were, you know, really good shots and probably knew a heck of a lot more about rifles than I did, especially precision rifles. A cop that was up there by the name of Steve Hayden, I thank him to this day. A very extremely knowledgeable guy, and to this day, if I had any questions, I would definitely reach out to him also when it comes to this stuff. And we tried out. We had to shoot, I believe it was at 100 yards, 3 rounds. And basically what the instructors were looking for was to see what your grouping was. And they wanted to make sure, I mean, these rifles are not sighted for us, the ones that we were shooting, because these are rifles that were other guys, but we had to use a rifle to try out. So we were told basically, you know, you're shooting, you know, for group, and we're going to take it from there. So my turn came up. I followed the instruction from the few days before of what, you know, the range instructor told me. And I stuck to what he told me, and I fired my 3 rounds. And after that, we weren't allowed to see what our papers looked like. They said they would call us and let us know from there. I was on my way home, and of course, you know, I wasn't sure how I did. I was on the LIE when I got a phone call from, and I'll never forget it to this day, Steve Hayden. And he told me, he goes, I know that you're probably wondering how you did. And I said, yeah, I am. I says, but I guess I'll find out, you know, eventually, you know, when I'm on, I'm on the team or not. And he said, well, I want to tell you though, you shot in the top 3. And I said, I did. And he goes, yeah, you did. You did very well. And and that was it. And we talked later on, talked another day, and later on to find out that I was going to be on the team. Later, one of the bosses called me and told me that I made the team. So from that moment on, you know, later on, eventually the training came up. It was I believe a couple weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, if I can remember correctly. It might have been 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but it's a lot of things to learn. It's a big response, other than any firearms responsibility. Anybody that handles firearms or carries, it's a big responsibility. But when you get on when you're handling these rifles, it becomes a bigger responsibility, because you're expected. There are certain things that not only do other cops expecting from you. You know, this is not military sniper stuff. It's totally different. You're in an urban environment now, so it's a lot different training, and it was a little bit. I can say I was a little bit nervous about it. You know, there's a lot of technical stuff, you know, that I had to continuously go over and over again. But I have to say, the instructors, along with other guys, you know, on the team that were also learning, we helped each other out. You rooted each other on. You're talking about a piece of equipment that you must stay focused. You have to pay a lot of attention to detail. patience. Especially you have to have the ability to handle a job under a lot of pressure. You have to be able to ultimately react smoothly and also efficiently. It's a lot of equipment that you're carrying, from the rifle to other equipment, from binoculars to night vision stuff, on top of other gear that you really need to have, depending on the weather. So many different things come into play with these rifles, whether it's weather, sight, light, whether it's dark outside, it's light outside, it's warm, it's cold, so many of these different things come into play, especially with the job where it's at. You're dealing with a lot of buildings, it could be in commercial areas, school areas. So you have to have that right mindset, and you have to, like I said, pay a lot of attention to detail. And you also have, you have to keep up your training. I enjoyed going to training. As if I could go to training at least once a week when it came to the rifle, which helps you and makes you become more proficient at it. I would have done it at least once a week if I could. I looked forward to the details all the time. It didn't matter what detail. If it was a Yankee Stadium detail, hey, that's awesome. But if it was a detail that involved the UN, or just a detail that involved a dignitary coming into the city, then so be it. This is what I signed up for. So it could be the coldest day I ever had, and it was crazy because in 2018 when I retired, I said I wanted to work on New Year's Eve. I had enough seniority that I didn't have to work New Year's Eve details, for a long time towards the end of my career. But that particular year, and it was the coldest day, I imagine. But I enjoyed every minute of it because I wanted to work with the guys that day. I wanted to be there on New Year's Eve, because I actually remember when I first came on the job. One of the first, I came out in March, and then then I had the New Year's Eve detail in Times Square, and as a rookie cop, and I froze my butt off that day, and here I am, my last day of my last detail of my career, and I froze it was so freezing out. But again, that's what I wanted to be on the team, and I had to take the bad with the good regardless, and it was good. I learned a lot. And I thank the instructors up at the range, the guys, that if I had questions, they were able to answer it. I enjoyed competing, competing with some of the guys, when you're out there shooting. You had good days and you had bad days during practice, but that's where that's why you go to training. And so that way, when you are out there, you can have the right mindset and you can stay focused, and you can handle those jobs under the pressure that you are. And again, like I said, it was a very big responsibility. I was very proud to be on the team. And if I had the choice to do it, I would do it all over again. I would absolutely do it all over again. It was one of the proudest things that I did on this job. It really was. And it wasn't, at the time that I was on the team, in the unit, when I had the rifle, I was the only woman to have it at the time. And it was good. You got a lot of looks. The guys out there, other cops thought it was really cool. I'm 5'1". I'm not a tall person, but I had a lot of gear, and I handled my business. I did everything I needed to do. As for being part of the team, and I enjoyed every day that I did it. Every day that I had a job that we had to go out or detail, it was just, for me, it was a lot of fun. It was just it was a challenge. And if working with these guys, I have to say, like I said, the knowledge that these guys had that they could give me, and in the camaraderie, and the calls that I would get sometimes, hey Tina, you did a great job, that was good. It's things like that made me feel really good. You go home that day, you feel so good, knowing that, you did the unit proud. You made the guys were happy. You didn't embarrass yourself, or the unit for that matter. But yeah, the sniper team is was one of the nice highlights of my career, I would say.
So Dean Esserman, who was a student at Dartmouth at the time and later on went on to serve as colonel of the Providence, Rhode Island Police, was also for a time chief of police here in my hometown of New Haven, Connecticut. He writes an essay where he happens to observe, and it's in the New York Times, and I have the article right in front of me. You know, the transit police could really use its own rescue squad, because even though we have the FNY rescue squads and we have the NYPD emergency service unit, as far as immediacy in response at the time, transit is not very well served. And thus the ball gets rolling. And this is what I wanted to ask you about, because I have the guy on the show tonight, or at least one of the guys that helped put this unit together. The ball got rolling on EMRU. So tell me about the planning and how we got the emergency medical rescue unit.
Okay. Dean Esserman was 19 years old at the time, and a lot of energy, and a brilliant young man too. He had this thing. We had a serious issue in New York City at the time with ambulance service. It was under what I believe was called Health and Hospitals Corporation. Okay, and they were floundering, and I mean floundering. I'm being generous. I don't know why, but you could wait an hour giving CPR for an ambulance, and when they show up, and you make a, where the hell you been? We've been upstairs. Nobody told us there was a thing down here. There was just a horrible communication network with Health and Hospitals Corporation. So Dean figured, and we were suffering in transit because, somebody falls at the bottom of the stairway at 59th and Lex, and let's say they break their pelvis, okay? You've got to block that stairway. 59th and Lex is it's under City Corp. It's a busy station. Now you've got all that turmoil in addition to the injured person, but you can't move them, broken pelvis. So you've got to wait until the right people get there to do the job, and you could wait an hour. And Dean came up with this thing about a rescue squad for the transit police. And certain people bought into it. Chief Garlick did, Chief Boza, Chief Valentine, Inspector Valentine at the time, bought into it. The biggest problem was, though, we were still in the middle of the financial crisis. So Chief Garlick said, I got no problem with it, but where are you getting the money? Well, Dean Esserman went out and he scrounged up money. He would go to the big corporations, get checks for $10,000. I'll never forget, he went to Brooklyn Union Gas. He said to them, I was with them this day. He says, A&S down the street here just gave us this much money. Would you like to help? And he gave them the whole story, Well, we can't give you money. I guess it had to do with the type of organization Brooklyn Union Gas was. But it says, we can give you a truck. We got new trucks coming in. We'll give you one. Okay, I'll take a $20,000 truck, And sure enough, a week later, a brand new truck is delivered to us. So Dean went out and hustled all of this. And with the help of Inspector at the time, Valentine, they came up with a first responder course, right? And they took everybody that was an a car driver, RMP driver, and they took some of us from fixed posts, like I had 42nd and 8th, and they sent us to this course. I think it was 2 weeks, I'm not sure. And during it, I got to talking with Dean and talking with George Mitchell and talking with Inspector Valentine. And I was a fire rescue captain out in Long Island, very busy town of Freeport. And so I had lots of experience with rescue. And we talked and talked and talked. And that was the end of it. We graduated these 40 guys from the class, and off we went. And about a week or two later, Inspector Valentine calls me up and he says, would you be interested in trying to put this unit together? I said, yeah. I said, I'd like to try. I says, and if it gets off the ground, I said, I'd like to be the first person in it. You know, I don't want to help set it up and say, well, thanks for coming by. We appreciate it. You know, and it involved myself and another officer working the spring and summer of 77, 12 hours, 12 or 14 hours a day between the two of us, with Dean riding with us. How much work is there? Where would we best serve? You know, doing all the logistics on it. And what kind of equipment do we need? And we did this for about, I'd say 5 or 6 weeks, 6 days a week. And there was days where myself and the other officer would put in 12-hour days each. No overtime or anything, because, well, let's see what happens in that period between 1 in the afternoon and 8 at night. You know, just trying out the different time periods. Because again, fiscal crisis, everything was going to be very limited as to what we could do or get. Are we okay with the time and everything?
Yeah, we're good. Keep going.
Okay. So we did it for about 6 weeks, I think. And Dean did his reports and his presentations to Inspector Valentine and Chief Garelick. And that was kind of the end of it. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, after I was back on patrol, I get thing on the radio, call the district. I call the district. They tell me call J Street. I'm like, well, am I in trouble here? Well, I get, yeah, well, you know, that's the first thing that comes to your mind.
Naturally.
And it's Dean. Where we go? I said, what do you mean where we go? He said, as of Monday, you're assigned down here at Gold Street. Where we go?
My job changed from, I'm still a commander, but now the eyes of the world are on my district. I'm responsible. You know, when you wear heavy's the head that wears the crown.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, it's my responsibility. I got what I needed. Great support from the superintendent and his team all the way on down. All I had to do was ask for it and got it. But you're still responsible for it. And, you know, it took me to a different level. Yeah, you know, it took care of the policing stuff and the crime. But now we've got journalists coming in from around the world to cover this. There's an international press briefing. There's this event. There's that event. MLB security wants to talk about this. And then when they made it into the World Series, it was designated a national security event, which brought in a whole level of help from our federal partners. And it really, you know, what's our, you know, it's prime target. You know, again, it's only 4 years later, you know, so it's a prime target. What are we going to do if somebody throws ricin in the field? You know, we got to do decontamination and so forth and so on. We actually had checkpoints set up, devised a system to check for radiological devices. And then there were other things too, like one of the games in the playoff series was going to be held on the same day as the Chicago Marathon, which is just huge, just right up there with the Boston Marathon. So we're in this meeting, we're sitting there, and somebody says, well, we got a little conflict here because part of the marathon was going through the footprint of Sox Park and where everything was being held. Somebody says, well, you know, if you want to have a 4 o'clock game or 2 o'clock game or whatever it is, you know, you're going to have these people still running. And there was a staggering lesson about the power of the media and TV in particular, advertisers. No, the marathon will not go through the footprint. The marathon will be rerouted. Somebody else from City Hall. Oh, I don't know if we can do it. It'll be rerouted. Don't worry. You know, we're talking about helicopters, you know, hovering over the stadium. They're violating federal aviation regulations. And somebody says, well, why don't we do something about this? Somebody from one of the Fed agencies said, We can only fine them $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is. And for that shot from the helicopter, they're willing to pay that fine. So we're not going to do it.
No,
we're not going to just learn to live with it. It's just fascinating. It was a carnival atmosphere, just a carnival atmosphere. And but again, carnival atmosphere, people getting shot, gangbangers going on, so it was like the little Dutch kid putting the fingers in the dike, just going from spot to spot.
2023 technology is so much different than when the unit first started in 2003. You have so much at your disposal. You have a lot of talented people that know how to use it. So tell me about now, as far as we talked about the styles of leadership, what is your style been to this point? What's your day-to-day like at a unit like that?
Well, the day-to-day is it's more of just the day. I'm still online in the field, working as a deputy chief in open divisions citywide, and I'm at counterterrorism about 1 day a week, trying to maintain that role and keep it going, and then working on it, in the firehouse and everything else. It's been a challenge. It's definitely been a challenge in light of everything that's going on. We're talking about cutting back budgets, cutting back overtime, coming out of the pandemic, where there was 3 years without training, 2 to 3 years without training or refreshing these members in rescue task force operations. There's been a huge challenge because of the sort of surprise, the change in tactics, like going in and telling firemen, hey, you're going to put on this ballistic gear and you're going to go into a shootings area and you're going to pull people out, and guys going, no, we don't want any part of that. We just did a class last night of members who have had no initial training, and we had 30 guys turn out, and they were into it, they were active, and I've met with some of these company commanders, and there are a good number of them that are, hey, we don't want to do it, but it's our job, and we're going to do the best at it. And these companies have really made sure their guys are refreshed and they're up to date on the procedures. And we now are able to, instead of taking a company and sending them there, we now will hire a dedicated rescue task force to be in the vicinity of a planned event, ready to go if something goes wrong. And we have people volunteering, hey, I'll do that, no problem. And so we, some of the events we have coming up, we have the Halloween parade tonight that we have a rescue task force out for. We've got the New York City Marathon on Sunday. We're providing 4 rescue task forces for, because those are the biggest challenges, are the events that are spread over several, like the 5-borough bike tour. We're talking about a large area protecting millions of people over, 26, 40 miles, depending on the event. Those are the real challenges in making sure that everyone has adequate protection.